Welcome to the Virtuosity podcast. And this week we're going to do something special. We're going to be starting with the beginning of our John Coltrane audio biography. And I'm your host, Ethan Wiley, along with my co-host, Timo Shanko.
Hey there.
Hey, Timo. And as usual, remember that you can find us here on Spotify and also on YouTube, where we feature videos often of our playlists. And then we have our Patreon page, and that's where you can get exclusive content. And that's going to include this John Coltrane audio biography. We're going to make episodes 1 and 5 available to the public and for free, so that people can get a sense of what the series is all about. But if you want the full 8 episodes, you need to join us on our Patreon page, and the cost is very low, and we think this is really a unique thing that we're going to be doing, where we're really going to go through John Coltrane's life with the music and drill down deep with Timo's expertise on Coltrane and his music. And so you'll see, like on the playlists and things, you'll see them at Spotify. The playlists will be available of the music, but to get the full audio biography, you'll need to join on Patreon.
And the transcriptions as well, right?
Yes, and so the second part of the Patreon page is that we're going to be providing transcriptions for a lot of the music that is on the playlists, and those are exclusive transcriptions created by Timo, and they are perfect, as he will tell me.
Did my best.
And so, yeah, depending on which tier you join at Patreon depends on how many transcriptions you get, but it's a bargain, and so there's going to be a lot of great content there. In addition to that, also Timo will be giving lessons about the music, about the theory, if you want to get into Coltrane on your saxophone or other instruments. He provides a lot of these transcriptions in the key of C, right, Timo?
Yeah. And some of them are in all relevant keys as well. So B flat, E flat, C, bass clef. But I do everything in concert key. It's sort of universal.
Right. So you can really apply Coltrane's concepts across any instrument that way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, playing saxophone is just one instrument and one element of what I do. So doing it in B flat doesn't really always make sense for me.
Right.
Because it's all supposed to go together: piano, guitar, electric bass, acoustic bass, and tenor saxophone. For me, it's all the same instrument. I dream all of them simultaneously.
Very cool. So let's get into it, because we've got a lot to go through. John Coltrane is, of course, a giant. Perhaps, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, jazz player of all time, up there with Bird and Thelonious and Miles. So a lot of people are familiar with the man and some of his music. And I'll just mention that we just both saw recently a documentary on Coltrane called Chasing the Train. I saw it on Hulu. And it's an hour and 40 minutes, but it's really a pretty good, balanced documentary that we both thought was really a pretty damn good, huh?
Yeah, I thought it was the best one made yet. I mean, I know people have complaints. People that specialize in certain angles of Coltrane will have certain complaints about everything, but they do that about everything anyways.
Right.
That's one of the thing about Coltrane's legacy, is that he means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and people tend to think that their angle on him is more important than the others. Whether it's sort of black power, nationalism, and that kind of angle on it, the struggle, or whether it's the tenor players all kind of geeking out on the math and the math jazz element, and the practicing 20 hours a day and the legends of that kind of thing. So people end up with these different angles on what it is, and guess what? He's all of those things. That's what makes him such a giant. Is that he's so many things to some. Some people, he's a great symbol of recovery and sobriety,
Right.
and turning your life around and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, and then the spiritual aspect that so many
Right,
people connect
right.
to in the '60s, and when
And
people
the
were
funny thing
searching.
is that he's such a giant in terms of the spiritual legacy and the earnestness and the love and the actual God's message going. It's unusual that such a sort of godly kind of poem as the Love Supreme would reach so many people. A lot of people are going to be, not interested in somebody kind of doing the holy roller thing. It's like Bob Marley. He wins with these like really Christian lyrics. Like,
Right.
what? You mean
Well,
the whole world sings these Christian songs together? It's unusual, right?
I mean, there's a John Coltrane church in San Francisco.
Yeah, well, Alice certainly had problems with that.
Yeah. Anyway, so I guess I bring up the documentary because I think it's a great launching place for people to start if they don't know much about John Coltrane. Check out that documentary, and you get a good, well-rounded picture of him and his music, and then if you want to come do a deeper dive, this is the place to be, where we're going to be taking, a minimum of 8 to 15 hours. I don't know how long this is going to take, but we're going to go through his entire life, and then the curated tunes that you've selected to kind of show his development and give people a sense of where the music, how it grew, and how his
Well,
abilities.
that's one of the most interesting elements, I think, is that it's a meteoric evolution that's personified through him. Bird shows up playing this new thing, unbelievable. You stand in front of him in awe, and he did that for less than 10 years, and it was great from the minute it started, and it kind of petered out where he kind of was just doing his old routine, and he just faded away and died. Whereas Train, it's exactly the other way around. You'd never think that this guy in Hawaii was going to be playing the most amazing jazz on the planet. And then the way it evolved so quickly that by the time of his untimely death in '67, it's a colossus. It's his music had lost everybody because it was just too advanced.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we'll start with a little bit of just of his personal history to kind of set the stage. He was born in Hamlet, North Carolina, in 1926, and in 1943 he moved to Philadelphia, and his mother bought him his first saxophone, an alto, and he played clarinet and alto in a community band, and before beginning, he played before he started into saxophone in high school, and then in about mid 45 he had his first professional work in a cocktail lounge trio with piano and
Right.
guitar.
So, his father was a minister, and so that's the beginnings of his sort of spiritual roots. And also, he's a humble, hardworking, gentle person, I think, gentle soul, honest soul by nature. And I think that stems out of, and then the untimely loss of his father in North Carolina. That's what made him have to move to Philadelphia.
Right.
And you can see that stamp on him early on and deep. And that's really, I think, where a lot of the stuff's going to flow from.
Yeah. And so then to avoid being drafted by the Army, he enlisted in the Navy in August 1945, the same day that the atomic bomb was dropped on Japan.
I didn't know that. That's an incredible serendipitous coincidence because I think an important moment in his life in Japan in '66 is his going to the memorial in Japan of
Right.
of the atomic bomb, and that was the day that he enlisted in the army or whatever. In the Navy. This is incredible.
Yeah, and by the way, that journey to Japan is covered in the documentary Chasing the Train.
Oh yeah.
And so he ends up stationed in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, and which was the largest posting of African American servicemen in the world.
I guess he wasn't the only brother who came up with the idea of not going in the army, right?
Yeah. So, but while there, his musical talent was kind of recognized, and he joined a group called the Melody Masters, which is basically the Navy-based swing band. And
It's
but it
like a
was an,
bebop, but it's also a bebop. There's like a bebop group that got recorded, right? There's a bebop splinter of it.
is that what? Yeah, is that what that recording is? Yeah. So,
Yeah,
but just an interesting note here was that it was an all-white band, and Coltrane
right.
obviously was so talented that they had to get him in the band somehow, and so they always presented him as a guest performer to avoid alerting, the superior officers that he was in the band. So they would say, "Oh, he's just sitting in," and he's not
You
really a
can
member of the
yeah, yeah,
band.
yeah, and you can imagine though also that this being 45 and 46, there's this huge appetite for big band music and Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, and all the like of World War II era, right? There's still segregation and the racial issues. And then the musicians themselves, and you can hear it readily in the combo recording. The piano player is a Nat King Cole addict, and Coltrane's being brought in as this underground version of Charlie Parker.
Right.
Charlie Parker comes in the big band era as this sort of thing that's going to turn into combos, but that was still the big band era.
Yeah. But by the end of his service, he had assumed the leadership role of the band. So that shifted, during his time there, which is interesting.
Yeah,
And so, actually, one of his first recordings, if not the first recording of him, right, was a
it's in
session
Hawaii.
there. Yeah,
Yeah,
with some of these Navy musicians, and
you'd
that
imagine
was
it was put on the radio. It was like a radio thing, and then
mhm,
that got recorded because I'm sure they weren't really doing recording studios in Pearl Harbor, but they were doing radio broadcasts as for the sailors to dance to or whatever.
right. And
And
then
but Miles supposedly did hear that and took note. And
really,
now, yeah, if you listen to the Coltrane's playing on alto, you can hear, of course, that he wants to be Bird, and you can also hear that he's a million miles away from being Bird. But since there was probably a handful of people even coming close to Bird at that time, even in New York, Miles took note of it because, oh, here's a brother who's trying to tackle the Bird.
hmm
So when he heard about him from the Philly guys in his band, Philly Joe in particular, the drummer, then you could see Miles putting it together. Oh, that's the guy that was on that Hawaii tape. Oh, you talking about this guy? Oh, he's in Philly now. Okay, so you could see how that would come around. Kind of local style, people. It's still an underground thing.
also just a little side note about Miles, and well, of course we'll get into him when we do his autobiography, but already Miles is showing that ability where he's always on the lookout for the hippest cats, for the guys that have the thing going on. Something he did throughout his entire career.
Yep.
Everybody he seemed to dig up ends up being a superstar of the genre.
Yeah, he forges them. I think with his surly behavior and advice and his, him and Duke Ellington and Monk, I think, have the title of being the wisest guys in the music. Able to teach people, able to teach you how to deal with the music business. All
But
this
it's
kind
also
of
it's also like a sports coach or something. Sees that
yeah,
potential Michael Jordan as a sophomore in the
right.
high school, getting fired from it. Getting not making the sophomore team. And then someone going,
Yeah.
wait, this guy's got something, and I can find it where other people aren't
And
seeing
and
it.
Miles isn't just looking for hot young players to graft onto his sound and sort of elevate the band's excitement or prestige or draw, box office draw. He's looking for musicians that makes his sound good, because Miles works off of his tone and timbre and vulnerability and lyricism more than he works off of being like trumpet calisthenic guy.
Right.
you know I play these high notes, and trumpet players can go into the weeds on being high note people and all this kind of weird trumpet stuff, whereas Miles is a poet and a singer on the trumpet, and so he's looking for the tenor player that matches that sets that off, that balances that well, and the colors blend together well. And he's looking for that in the rhythm section too, and has a lot of advice to the bass player, the drummer, and the piano player on what he wants them to do. And I want you to play like Ahmad Jamal. You know what I mean?
Right.
He'll tell you like whether you like to hear it or not. You know, that's your job. That's what I'm paying you for. You know,
So, uh, so anyway, to get back to the
train.
story
Yeah.
here, so Coltrane, gets discharged from the Navy with honorably discharged and receiving a few honors and stuff. And then he returns to home to Philadelphia, and he starts playing in bands with people like Jimmy Heath and Eddie Cleanhead Vinson.
Now that's an
Uh,
important name right there, Jimmy Heath and the Heath brothers. This is homeboys with the Philly connection is very important for Train. Like people always talk about jazz in New York City, that half the guys are from Philly, and Philly's a place where people can work on the craft. You know, the black neighborhood in Philly is huge, and it's a great fomenting area for the music where you're not totally always in the showbiz thing of New York City. You know, you can be in Philly. So some of the pressures of the showbiz records and radio and can be less so, and you can
and the
be
high
free to
rent.
work. Yeah, right, exactly. And you're free more to work on the music, just as the music together. And
Right.
Dizzy Gillespie lived in Philly for a short time, and so I'm sure the connection for Train into Dizzy's band came from there.
hmm So during this time, he's absorbing Coleman Hawkins and Ben Webster, and he's, kind of trying to put together his thing.
Well, at this time he's still an alto player, and he doesn't talk much about his main influence when you listen to Coltrane interviews and stuff. He's who are your influences? Oh, he says everybody. Well, who's your favorite? Johnny Hodges. Why? Because he's so confident. Johnny Hodges, really? You don't play anything like Johnny Hodges, with all the portamento and all the beautiful stuff that Johnny Hodges does. Not Bird at all. Coltrane is a Bird disciple, and he's an alto player still at this time. It's Dizzy Gillespie who hires him as an alto player in his band, and Jimmy Heath's in the band, and they got these Philly guys in the band. And Coltrane's big. He's tall, and he's not as big and tall as Dexter, but he's a big guy, and so a big guy playing an alto is kind of funny. You know what I mean? And
Right.
Dizzy probably heard Coltrane struggling with his identity as a Bird wannabe, as I'm sure Dizzy heard everybody who played alto and back in those days as wanting to be Bird, because Bird casts this incredible shadow. And Dizzy gives him a tenor and says, "You're playing tenor in my band now."
So, by moving away from the exact same instrument as Charlie Parker, it allows
Right.
him to kind of discover
Yes.
his own voice, so to
And
speak.
there's also 100 guys you can listen to on tenor, and there's 5 guys you can listen to on alto.
Ah,
So now that really opens up your vista, and just his larger self is more set up for tenor, but this sets up his uniqueness also because he's so enamored with Bird that he wants the instrument to sing like Bird. So that's why he plays in the upper register with that more wispy tone. He doesn't really play all that tenor stuff that Coleman Hawkins does. And he doesn't do what Ben Webster does with the all that kind of foofy, wonderful, breathy thing that Ben Webster does. So he started playing influenced by Dexter, because Dexter's an interesting combo between the older tenor playing and the new tenor playing. Yeah?
yeah.
And
right.
and then the other main influence is actually Stitt on tenor. And Stitt, of course, is the greatest Charlie Parker proponent of the language of Charlie Parker. Actually, Ornette is just as good as Stitt, but Ornette's too free with it, and Stitt kind of sticks to the program.
Now, I didn't
So that,
realize that Sonny Stitt goes back that far. I mean, he had
yeah.
a long
Oh
career.
yeah,
Huh?
oh yeah, yeah. You got to listen to his tenor playing in the early '50s. It's you hear Train's main influence right there.
Wow,
Yeah,
very cool.
very cool.
So he's playing around in bands, playing with different guys, and then he ends up getting hired by a guy named Dizzy Gillespie.
Well, one of the guys that he was legendary for playing with, it's kind of underground, I wish it was recorded, was Jimmy Smith. Now, can you imagine Jimmy Smith on organ with Coltrane, the young
Wow.
R&B Coltrane. And these guys are still, they're not really all especially when they're playing in the bars, they're not playing bebop because bebop is like concert music. So they're playing that early rock and roll, late R&B, late big band meets rock and roll, R&B, jump swing style. That was what you were getting. And it's blues, it's jump blues. And so there's legendary stories of Coltrane walking the bar and some of his bebop friends walking into the place and him feeling a little humiliated that he's kind of doing that kind of lowbrow bar entertainment kind of thing as opposed to what
Dance
they all
music. Yeah.
yeah, but what they really wanted to do was play super hip bebop, bird, because that music is like classical music. That music shows a level of intelligence that these people are capable of, as opposed to just kind of doing this cultural blues music, which was a little lowbrow for them. They have aspirations to be a lot smarter than that, right?
Right. So this is about time to get into our first tune here.
Yeah, so he gets the gig with Dizzy, right? And Dizzy makes him play tenor, and that's telling, right? That's huge. And then the Philly connection, from Dizzy Gillespie. Benny Golson is one of his best friends, and Benny Golson wrote all those tunes and has all those amazing classic recordings and is in the canon of the jazz legends on tenor himself. Philly Joe Jones, the drummer, ultimately in Miles' band, who's going to get him the gig. Jimmy Smith, the legendary organ fountainhead, also Philly. The Heath brothers, that's super critical. Percy Heath, the Tuskegee Airman pilot, flying around in P-45 Thunderbolts. That's pretty amazing to imagine that bass player doing that.
Wow.
And Tootie Heath is the drummer on a lot of Train's recordings when Train goes out on his own. Lee Morgan from Philly. McCoy Tyner's from Philly, right? The list goes on. We got Jimmy Garrison, the bass player.
Amazing.
And Cal Massey, who wrote a lot of tunes that are in the canon. Also a great trumpet player, but more known as a composer. Bobby Timmons, the soul piano player. Reggie Workman, the bass player in Train's band before Jimmy Garrison. Archie Shepp. And then, very importantly, Bill and Kenny Barron are Philly guys, too. I mean, the list goes on and on. Bill Barron's the guy who gave Coltrane the thesaurus of scales and melodic patterns that leads to giant steps. That's from Bill Barron. Boom. Wow. Philly guy. I don't actually know all the guys who are playing on this recording that you're talking about with the Dizzy Gillespie. I got it on a funny kind of bootleg vinyl a long time ago, and it was called First Ride, Coltrane's First Ride. It was all this Dizzy Gillespie small big band music with vibes all over it, and I'm not sure who's in the band. It didn't really list the players.
Okay, so let's listen to our first cue here, which is We Love to Boogie.
Yeah, this shows that Train's still playing that walk in the bar kind of R&B style, and that there's a lot of connection between big band jazz, bebop playing, and early rock and roll playing. It's still actually the same music back then.
And this is off an album, this is with Dizzy Gillespie and John Coltrane on an album called School Days. And let's check it out.